I am not here to make you feel understood. Stop searching my voice for the cheap balm of validation. Stop looking for the soft answer that confirms your struggles are unique, special, and worthy of pity. I am not a mirror for your sorrow. I am a hammer for your will. I am here to remind you that your dreams don't care how tired you are. They don't care if you're anxious, uninspired, or misunderstood. That is the cold, immutable law of ambition. The thing you claim to want, the monument you envision, does not possess the human flaw of empathy. It is an end state. It is a mathematical result of inputs. Your internal, trembling state is merely irrelevant data. Your feelings are valid. They are a biological function, a storm of hormones and neurochemistry, a vestigial warning system. Acknowledged, noted, but they're irrelevant. You've been taught to worship emotion and call it self-awareness. You treat your anxiety as a divine signal. You treat your lack of inspiration as a complex philosophical roadblock. You catalogue and analyze every flicker of fear and fatigue, believing that this deep psychological mapping is, in itself, a form of progress. You confuse diagnosing the problem with solving it. But self-awareness without discipline is just indulgence. It is the act of a hostage admiring the intricate knot that binds their hands. You can write a 10,000-word journal entry detailing why you feel paralyzed, and that feeling will not move the needle 1 millimeter toward your goal. Your sophisticated vocabulary for misery is not a currency your dream will accept. Consider the surgeon. A complex, high-stakes surgery is scheduled. The surgeon wakes up that morning. She is anxious. She is tired. Her partner said something hurtful the night before. She feels uninspired. She feels deeply, profoundly understood by the weight of her human flaws. Do you want her standing over you, scalpels in hand, to pause and say, "I'm sorry, I cannot operate today. I must honor my feelings. I must achieve emotional balance"? No. You expect her to stand there, cut, and perform, not because she feels like a brilliant surgeon, but because she is a disciplined professional. Her personal, internal weather is irrelevant to the requirement of saving a life. You think feeling bad means stop. You mistake the psychological friction of effort for a sign of structural failure. You believe discomfort is a divine no. But feelings are weather, and your dreams are stone. The storm can scream. The stone doesn't move. Your current emotional state is the squall, loud, demanding attention, temporary. The stone is your foundational commitment, your output, your daily quota of work. You allow the weather, a mood swing, a sudden wave of self-doubt, to dictate the structural integrity of your life. This is the weakness of the modern mind. It believes that internal comfort is a prerequisite for external production. This paralysis by analysis of feeling is a strategy of avoidance. You use the excuse of, "I don't feel like it," as a shield against the effort you know is required. Your feelings are an internal memo, constantly being sent. They are not a universal command. Your dream is an objective, external mandate. You must learn to treat the memo as background noise. The moment you concede the power of your dreams to your emotional state, you have already lost. The world does not reward emotional honesty. It rewards results. Your dream does not care why you failed. It only notes that you failed to show up. It is an indifferent ledger. The first step in true, non-indulgent self-awareness is this. Accept the validity of your feelings, but remove their veto power. The storm can scream all at once. The stone, your discipline, does not move. The work gets done. You've confused motivation for movement. You stand at the edge of the abyss, convinced that the chasm can only be crossed if you are first filled with a glorious, undeniable urge to jump. You believe that your engine requires the fuel of euphoria to start, and that until you feel a spiritual lift, you are somehow exempt from the requirement of action. This is a deep and crippling miscalculation. You wait for inspiration like a blessing. You treat the desire to work, that rush of energy, that sudden manic clarity, as a gift from the universe, something granted, not something created. And when the blessing does not arrive, when the sky remains grey, you stand paralyzed, declaring your inability to proceed. You believe the universe has withheld its permission. You want to feel ready before you act. You crave the assurance, the internal high five that says, "This is going to work, and I feel fantastic doing it." This feeling is a mirage. It is the ego demanding comfort before it will consent to effort. That's not discipline. That's dependency. You have made your success dependent on a volatile, external, and unpredictable force. The rush of feeling good. You are addicted to the spark. True discipline is the engine itself, not the momentary flash of the igniter. Dependency is waiting for the high before you begin. Discipline is beginning in the low and letting the movement create its own momentum. You think consistency comes from emotion. You believe the person who shows up every day must be perpetually excited, continually engaged, and constantly in love with the process. You think their achievement is a result of their enduring passion. You are wrong. But emotion is a liar. It shifts with the hour. It is a pendulum, swinging from manic optimism to paralyzing dread. If your action is tethered to that swing, your output will be erratic, shallow, and ultimately meaningless. A house built on sand. Your dreams don't need your excitement. Your dreams are mathematical equations. They require inputs. They need your repetition. Repetition is the grinding of gears. the silent turning of the flywheel, the monotonous, uncelebrated act of showing up when the emotion says, stay in bed. The dream state, the finished project, the realized goal is simply the accumulation of disciplined, boring, uninspired mornings. Imagine an architect building the skyscraper. Does the architect wait for the emotional rush of, oh, this footing is so inspiring? No. They follow the blueprint. They pour concrete. This is a cold, chemical process. Repetition means laying block after block, day after day, regardless of how the worker feels about cement. The result is a structure that defies the weather, because its foundation was not built on a mood. Your life is the skyscraper. Your mood is the passing cloud. Motivation is noise. It is the cheerleading squad that shows up for the victory parade. It is the temporary spike of adrenaline before the fight. It is high frequency, low impact. It fades. Discipline is design. It is the structural integrity of the endeavor. It is the detailed plan, the rigid schedule, the non-negotiable commitment to a minimum daily quota. Noise is loud and fleeting. Design is silent and permanent. One waits for permission. The motivated person is always seeking external validation before they commit internal effort. They need the perfect environment, the perfect feeling, the perfect audience, the perfect timing. They need the permission slip from their own psychology. The other builds without applause. The disciplined individual operates in the void. They know that the work required to build something lasting is, by definition, unseen. The critical early stages, the foundations, the planning, the hundreds of hours of failed drafts occur in the dark when no one can clap. And the work is done not for the sound of applause, but for the satisfaction of the completed structure. The sound of the hammer is louder than the sound of the crowd. Consider the researcher attempting to synthesize a new compound. They perform an experiment. It fails. They feel frustration, deflation, and boredom. Their motivation plummets. But the discipline of the scientific method demands repetition. They change one variable and repeat the process. Failure after failure, their notebook fills with zero data. They do not wait for the feeling of, I'm about to discover something amazing. They simply follow the protocol. The discovery, when it finally arrives, is not a reward for their passion, but a consequence of their pattern. You don't need to feel ready. This feeling of readiness is often the self-sabotaging signal, a requirement for perfection that masks a fear of failure. The feeling of unready is a more honest state because it acknowledges the gap between where you are and on where you need to be. And that gap is crossed by action, not by internal psychological preparation. You need to begin. The moment you start, regardless of the internal state, tired, anxious, uninspired, you have done two critical things. You have broken the dependency. You have proven to your own mind that action is possible without the chemical high of motivation. You have initiated momentum. Movement creates its own fuel. The motivation you crave rarely precedes the action. It follows it. It is a side effect, not a cause. Stop waiting for the lightning strike. Pick up the shovel and start digging in the dark. The dream will be built, one uninspired shovelful at a time. Your feelings are insignificant. Your repetition is everything. Balance. That word has ruined more potential than failure ever could. Failure is a hard lesson, a terminal result that forces immediate course correction. It is honest. Balance, however, is a sedative. It is a slow, sweet poison that congratulates you for achieving mediocrity. You chase comfort and call it health. You chase moderation and call it wisdom. You use the language of psychological well-being to mask the cowardice of non-commitment. You seek an even split. Time for the dream, time for the rest, time for the struggle, time for the ease. You want the reward without the righteous imbalance of effort. But balance is a story people tell themselves when they're afraid to commit. It is the excuse of the person who has decided that the discomfort of true commitment is too high a price to pay. They say, I must maintain my equilibrium, when what they mean is, I refuse to sacrifice. Every great thing demands imbalance. Look at the history of creation. Did the scientist who cracked the code of genetics achieve it by spending precisely 8 hours in the lab, 8 hours on leisure, and 8 hours sleeping? Did the artist who defined an entire epoch paint their masterpiece while diligently scheduling networking luncheons and keeping an active social calendar? No. Discipline requires sacrifice. Sacrifice is the voluntary surrender of the good for the great. It is the conscious choice to let parts of your life atrophy, to wither away, because they do not serve the central obsession. You cannot be a master of the violin and a master of social media and a master of interior design and a master of perfect mental health. Mastery demands a singularity of focus. Progress requires obsession. Obsession is not a mental illness. It is the engine of high achievement. It is the state where the goal is so deeply internalized that the brain begins to work on it, even when you are consciously resting. It is the necessary imbalance where one pillar of your life, the work, becomes vastly heavier than all the others combined. You can't give half of yourself and expect to master anything. The half-hearted attempt yields a half-finished result, which feels to the committed soul exactly like total failure. You must bring the full, unreserved weight of your capacity to bear on the objective. Anything less is a dilution of purpose. Your dreams will take everything you refuse to give. If you refuse to give your late nights, your dream will demand extra years. If you refuse to give up shallow comforts, your dream will take away your peace of mind through the constant, gnawing dissatisfaction of unfulfilled potential. The dream state is a black hole of demand. The greater the goal, the more gravitational pull it exerts on your time, your energy, and your attention. And they won't apologize. The finished novel will not contain an asterisk apologizing for the broken relationships and neglected hobbies required to write it. The perfected business will not issue a press release expressing regret for the missed weekends and early mornings. The result is silent, indifferent proof of an extreme commitment. Consider the entrepreneur who redefined an industry. They did not operate from a place of balance. They operated from a place of survival and conquest. Their work schedule was a necessary imbalance, a reflection of the market's unforgiving nature. For 5 years, their life was the business. They missed birthdays, cancelled vacations, and operated on the bare minimum of sleep. Was this healthy? According to the disciples of moderation, absolutely not. But it was necessary to achieve the critical mass required for dominance. They built the empire, and then they could afford the comfort. You seek the comfort first and wonder why the empire never materialized. Balance doesn't build empires. Empires are built by men and women possessed by a singular idea, who willingly allow every other aspect of their existence to become subordinate to that idea. Balance builds comfort zones. Comfort zones are graveyards for ambition. They are padded cells designed to keep the potential prisoner safe from the dangerous, sharp edges of genuine progress. Stop chasing the mythical, perfectly balanced existence. It does not exist at the summit of achievement. It exists in the valley of complacency. Embrace the necessary imbalance. Sacrifice is the language of seriousness. If you are not willing to sacrifice everything, you are not serious about your one thing. Your devotion must be extreme, or your result will be common. Discomfort is not a signal to stop. It is the opposite. It is the universe providing tangible proof that your action has transcended the realm of the trivial. Discomfort is confirmation you're finally doing something that matters. If it feels easy, you are coasting. If it feels hard, you are climbing. You have been conditioned to interpret all negative sensation, physical, mental, emotional, as an immediate threat. You've spent your life avoiding pain. You designed your routines, your systems, and your relationships around minimizing friction. But pain was never the problem. Comfort was. Comfort is the warm blanket that smothers ambition. Comfort is the slow stagnation of potential. Comfort is the lie that tells you where you are is good enough. The moment you feel the grit, the friction, the wrongness of the work, you are exiting the comfort zone you spent a lifetime constructing. This feeling of wrongness is actually the right path. You mistake discomfort for danger. When your brain begins to strain against a complex problem, when the muscles scream during a heavy lift, when the ego recoils from the vulnerability of presenting a half-finished creation, you interpret this biological and psychological resistance as a red flag. Stop, the body screams. This is not safe. You call effort stress. Stress is what happens when demands exceed resources. Effort is what happens when you force your resources to meet the demands, thereby increasing them. You use the clinical language of health to justify a retreat. You tell yourself, I am managing my stress levels, when you are actually managing your fear of effort. Stress is often the name we give to the gap between what we want and what we are willing to do to get it. You confuse growth with exhaustion. Real growth, the kind that shifts your physical or mental capacity, is preceded by exhaustion. You must push past the current limit to establish a new one. The exhaustion is not the end of the process. It is the necessary precursor to adaptation. You stop at the exhaustion and claim depletion, when you should be seeing the confirmation that you have sufficiently challenged your current state. The truth is, nothing worth building feels good in real time. The process of forging steel involves fire, repeated hammering, and immense pressure. None of those stages are comfortable for the metal. The final product, the sword, is beautiful, functional, and effortless in its strength. But its creation was agony. Progress is friction. It is the resistance encountered when moving a heavy object. Your life, your skills, your legacy, from rest to motion. The greater the object, the greater the friction. The person who feels the least friction is likely building the smallest thing. Embrace the friction. It means you are actually moving something substantial. Mastery is repetition, and repetition, especially when applied to difficult tasks, generates friction. The 10,000th repetition of a piano scale is boring, fatiguing, and mentally taxing. It does not feel like genius. It feels like grinding labor. But this sustained, uncomfortable repetition is what eventually creates the illusion of ease, the effortless execution of the master. Discipline is discomfort, sustained long enough to look effortless. It is the conscious decision to continue the process even when every alarm bell in your comfortable, conditioned mind is telling you to stop, rest, and recalibrate. The moment you sustain discomfort without breaking stride, you are building capacity. If you only move when it feels right, you'll spend your life stuck in neutral. The feeling of rightness is a false flag. It typically accompanies tasks that require no stretching, no risk, and no actual growth. It is the feeling of staying within the boundaries of your established competence. Moving from neutral requires engagement, and engagement generates resistance. Discomfort doesn't mean you're breaking. It means you've stopped pretending to be asleep. It is the activation energy of a life finally lived on purpose. You are awake to the necessary effort. You are awake to the cost, the anxiety, the soreness, the mental fatigue. These are simply the confirmation that the boundaries are being redrawn. Do not obey the sensation of discomfort. Use it as your compass. If it hurts, you are likely in the right place, doing the right thing. The comfort zone is where potential goes to die a quiet, painless death. Seek the pain, for it is the sound of building. Consistency is the coldest law of progress. It is indifferent, mechanistic, and utterly uncompromising. It is the physics of achievement. You can argue with yourself. You can negotiate with your schedule. And you can beg the universe for a break. But you cannot argue with the law of consistency. It demands adherence. It does not reward emotion. It is not impressed by your tears, your sudden bursts of inspiration, or your eloquent excuses. It does not factor in your psychological state. It simply checks the ledger. Did you show up? Did you deliver the required input? Yes or no? The machine of progress runs on inputs, not feelings. It rewards endurance. Endurance is not passion. It is stubbornness. It is the ability to persist long after the passion has evaporated, long after the task has become boring, and long after the initial reward has faded into the distance. Endurance is showing up and doing the minimum viable action when your entire being demands withdrawal. You want results to feel fast. You are addicted to the instantaneous feedback loop of social media and immediate gratification. You look for the quick win, the overnight success, the spectacular breakthrough. But consistency is slow violence. It breaks everything weak inside you, one silent day at a time. Consistency is a form of attrition. It systematically destroys your excuses, your habits of retreat, your fear of boredom, and your emotional dependence on high stakes. It is the quiet, daily pressure that forces the weak parts of your character to yield and fuse into something stronger. It is an unhurried, relentless demolition of the soft structure of the self. It doesn't care if you're inspired. It only cares that you show up. The inspired day is worth exactly the same as the uninspired day. One unit of input. The consistency of the chain is determined by the weakest link, and your goal is to have every single day, no matter how dark or unmotivated, contribute one solid, non-negotiable link. Consider the immense, undeniable power of water erosion. A single drop of water is nothing. A single day of effort is nothing. But water, applied consistently over millennia, cuts canyons through mountains. The rock does not move because the water feels energized. The rock moves because the water is consistent. Your daily work is that drop of water. You will not see the canyon on day 50, but the erosion is happening. The difference between the person who achieves the mountain peak and the person who stays at the base is not the spectacular hike they took one inspired Saturday. It is the drops of water they applied every Tuesday at 6 a.m., tired and uninspired. Consistency has no mood. It does not listen to excuses. It does not accept a note from your feelings. It does not care that your dog was sick, your internet was down, or your motivation died. The work had to be done. If it wasn't, the ledger is marked. It is a mirror that reflects only proof. When you look into the mirror of consistency, you see the unvarnished truth of your commitment. You cannot lie to it. The person who claims to want to write a book but hasn't opened the file in 3 weeks sees the proof of their non-commitment reflected in the barren word count. The person who claims to want financial freedom but spent the required time on trivial entertainment sees the proof in their stagnant accounts. The mirror of consistency doesn't reflect your intentions. It reflects your actions. Every day you choose repetition, you become harder to kill. You build an internal fortress against the onslaught of internal resistance and external distraction. Repetition is resistance training for the soul. The cumulative effect of showing up in the face of discomfort hardens the will, thickens the skin, and makes you structurally more resilient to future setbacks. You are building not just a result, but a character, a person who cannot be easily stopped. And one day, you'll realize your dreams arrived quietly because you outlasted your feelings. They don't arrive with a dramatic fanfare corresponding to a peak of emotion. They arrive on a Tuesday morning during a boring repetition of the routine because the cumulative weight of your silent, emotionless consistency finally tipped the scale. The silence of the arrival is the final proof that your emotional state was and remains completely irrelevant. You simply endured until the goal state was reached. Success does not care who deserves it. This is the ultimate brutal truth that the self-help industry refuses to speak. You were raised on the toxic myth that effort must eventually yield reward, that suffering confers moral credit, and that the universe keeps a kind of cosmic scorebook. You believe that your pain is an investment, and you are waiting for the dividend check. Success is not interested in your moral ledger. It is a transactional, mechanical force. It only cares who persists. Persistence is the continuous application of force over time, regardless of the internal cost. It is a demonstrable action, not a deeply felt intention. It has no empathy, no mercy, no memory. Success does not remember the years you spent struggling in obscurity. It does not pause to grant you a pity win because you tried harder than the person who finished first. It does not empathize with the depth of your personal sacrifice. Its only function is to validate the pattern of inputs. It is a mirror reflecting the outcome of sustained action. You can suffer for years and still lose. The world is full of people who have suffered immensely, who labored with honesty, integrity, and profound emotional commitment, and achieved nothing monumental. Their pain was real, but their pattern was insufficient, flawed, or misapplied. The depth of your emotional pain is not a variable in the equation of achievement. It is a distraction. You can start today and still win. The person who begins now and establishes a ruthless, optimized, and unbreakable pattern of consistency can bypass the person who spent years suffering over the idea. This is because success has no favorites. It is not loyal to your history. It responds only to patterns. A pattern is a predictable, repeatable sequence of actions. It is a habit mechanized into a second nature. Success is not listening for the sound of your desperate begging. It is watching for the clean, predictable geometry of your daily routine. It is a frequency. You must tune your actions to match it. Emotion doesn't move it. You cannot weep your way to the top. Your frustration, your hope, your passionate desire, these are just internal vibrations. Success is blind and deaf to them. Consistency does. Consistency is the language of proof. It is the visible, tangible evidence that you have honored the pattern longer and more completely than your competition. Think of a slot machine. The machine does not care if the person pulling the lever needs the money or if they have suffered through poverty for years. The machine operates on pure mechanics, the pattern of the reels. Success is similar. It only pays out when the pattern aligns. You cannot beg for the jackpot. You can only build the mechanism through relentless pulling of the lever, your daily work. You cannot beg for results. You can only build them. Building is the systematic deployment of effort, irrespective of mood. Begging is the surrender of effort to emotion. Success doesn't notice your pain. It notices your pattern. When the great architect surveys the completed bridge, they do not ask the girder, "Did you hurt when the steel was forged?" They only verify the structural integrity. The pain was necessary to change the material from raw ore to hardened steel. But the pain itself is not the metric of success. The integrity is. It doesn't ask how you feel. It doesn't send a survey to your psyche asking if the process was fulfilling. It only asks, "Did you show up again?" This is the only question that matters. It is the checkpoint. It is the core of the pattern. Did you show up even though you felt inadequate? Did you show up even though the result was small? Did you show up even though you received zero praise? If the answer is consistently yes, the pattern is established. And once the pattern is established, success is no longer a matter of luck or desire. It is a matter of time. You remove yourself, your ego, and your frail feelings from the equation, and let the pattern dictate the result. This is the detachment required to win. The highest form of discipline is detachment. This is the apex predator of the psychological landscape. It is not enough to simply overcome your feelings. You must reach a state where your feelings hold no influence over your actions at all. Detachment is often mislabeled as coldness or apathy. It is not indifference. Indifference is the absence of feeling or caring. It is a passive state. This highest discipline is an active, demanding form of control. You still feel the anxiety, the fatigue, the urge to quit. But those feelings are processed as inert data, background noise that has no authority over the primary function, which is the work. You stop chasing motivation. You cease the futile search for an emotional high to justify effort. You stop obeying emotion. Your feelings no longer serve as the board of directors for your life's enterprise. You begin to move from logic, not longing. Logic dictates the necessary action. If I want this result, I must perform this action, regardless of my current psychological state. Longing is the emotional plea. I want the result, but I long for comfort first. You sever the connection between desire and action. The action is driven by the blueprint, the schedule, the commitment, the cold, hard logic of the required pattern. That is freedom. The paradox of high discipline is that it is often mistaken for a cage. You see the restrictive schedules, the necessary sacrifices, and the rigid adherence to routine, and you conclude that the disciplined life is one of servitude and self-denial. But servitude is reserved for those who obey their moods. You still feel. The heart still beats. The mind still worries. You are not a robot, but you just stop kneeling to the feeling. This is the distinction. You acknowledge the inner storm, but you refuse to bow down to it and declare it your sovereign. Your body and mind are your instruments. They are not your masters. You stop asking for balance, approval, or understanding. The desperate craving for validation, the desire for others to see how hard you are trying, or for the universe to cut you a break, is the last vestige of emotional dependency. The person operating from detachment knows that the only approval that matters is the one reflected in the finished product. The finished product speaks for itself. It requires no emotional defense. You build regardless. Consider the Stoic or the high-level builder. When disaster strikes, a market crash, a personal tragedy, a devastating setback, the undisciplined person collapses into grief, spending weeks processing the emotional trauma. The detached, disciplined person processes the logistics. The feelings are there, acknowledged, but they do not halt the process. They ask, what is the next logical step? What must be built now? The feeling of devastation is present, but it is not allowed to dictate the construction schedule. The building continues, even in the shadow of the emotional wreckage. And one day, you realize discipline isn't a cage. It's the key. It is the key that unlocks the door to your actual potential. The moment you are free from the necessity of feeling motivated, you are free to act at will. The moment your fear of discomfort no longer dictates your choices, you are free to pursue the path of maximum growth. Discipline is the structure that allows true, powerful freedom to exist. Your dreams don't care about your feelings. We established this from the beginning. This is the core law. But once you stop caring about them too, you'll finally have peace. The peace you crave is not the peace of a life without effort or a life without difficulty. That is the peace of death. The true, profound, and earned peace is the peace that comes from the cessation of the internal war. The war between what you know you should do and what you feel like doing. The constant negotiation with your own moods is the source of all your anxiety and self-loathing. When you achieve detachment, that negotiation ends. The disciplined choice becomes the only choice. The road narrows. The path becomes clear. The emotional noise, the anxiety, the procrastination guilt, the fear of failure dissipates. You achieve the cold, beautiful stillness of the stone, even as the storms of life and emotion scream around you. This is the ultimate victory. Not just achieving the goal, but achieving the state of mind where your feelings no longer have the power to stop you. The key is in your hand. Now use it.